Let me first greet to you in Tibetan, because I found that there are a lot of Tibetans here, so I wouldn't be quite right to ignore completely. Regina Balak, Tashidile, Samrishu Choba, Tashidile. That the Bon religion of Tibet. Well, it's difficult really to begin, difficult to know where to begin in this. And I'm very, very happy that Professor Janet Jat is here. So it is very, very reassuring that I'm sure that if we have any difficulties in answering the questions, that we can ask her as well to sort out the problem. I suppose that the Bon religion was there before the Buddhism came, but of course this has become controversial, whether this was a kind of a religion or not, especially among the Tibetologists. There has been quite a long discussion, and some very well-known Tibetologists say that before 10th century there was no such belief or religion called Bon. Other specialists say quite the contrary. It was some kind of a belief, and among this myself included, Bon religion was some kind of a belief, a system of belief that exists at least from the 7th century. For example, we know from the Dunhuang documents that measuring quite a number of specialists called Bon or Shen carrying out funeral rituals when a king or emperor of Tibet died, or even, for example, before the death of the emperor, they seem to begin to construct tombs and so on. And these were called mostly Sheng, Bon or Sheng. And I suppose that there were lots of oral tradition. And it is true that there is no written tradition that we can find, or any kind of evidence of the existence of a written tradition within the Bon tradition before the 10th century. And there are rituals. The manuscript was discovered at the beginning of the 20th century from Dunhuang and Western China. And these old manuscripts that date around to the end of the 9th century or the beginning of the 10th century. And they were, among these manuscripts, we can read lots of texts that are concerned with the rituals, the stories, other mythological things. So, in other words, I believe that before the 10th century, the Bon religion, or this belief is called the Bon, did exist, but it was not quite totally organized religion. And I would like to go on now from about the 11th century. Then there is something, Bon religion called, with the title Yongtung. Yongtung is some sort of cross that used as a title, and it's called Yongtung Bon. And with this, then we can see that this Bon religion has some kind of very organized form of religion, with already at the beginning in the 11th century already quite a large amount of literature tracing or hagiographical accounts of the founder called Tombashiro, and whose birth or death we don't know much about it, but there is a very long detailed account, supposed to be the biographical account of this master. We do find the the names of Shenrab, Mu, in Dunhuang manuscripts. That means dating back, as I said before, to the end of the 9th century. With the Burn religion, organized Burn religion, then we have there is a very complex monastic system. We have monasteries from in the different places in the central Tibet, with the monks much the same way organized this system like a Buddhist monastery, even much similar, even to the extent of what they wear, their costumes, and so on. The only different thing is that when you arrive in a Bon monastery, the first thing you find that the Bon people go around the holy object or temples, go around like that, which was what we call the anti-clockwise. That seems to be different. And there is also swastika symbols also turning to the left. So you see that this is not a Buddhist monastery, it is the Bon monastery. But if you read the philosophical texts of the Bon religion, it is difficult to make a distinction how far different it is, in fact, from Buddhist doctrines. And I don't think we will spend too much time on this question. Apart from the monastic establishments, there is also, at the beginning, from the beginning of the 11th century, there are 5 different big family lineages. They call it Dongju, some sort of sacred lineage within one family. And these 5 families were extremely important in developing this organized religion. And for example, in one family, one is called Xingzang, the family of Xin. And this, for example, if the family have got 2 brothers, the elder one is always to become monk, and then he looks after the monastery that belongs to the family. But he looks after the monastery, whereas the younger brother stays at home and married and keep continuing the family tradition. This kind of arrangements were quite common even among the Buddhists like Sakyar, for example, Anandji Kung, and so on. And there were 4, as I say, there are 5 families, and we still have these families in Tibet, except one family which was called the Zhuzang. This it disappeared because the second Panchen Lama was born, who recognized a child from this family, and then during the 5th Dalai Lama's rule, and then the Tuku, the reincarnation, was escorted from the family to Tashilambu, which means that normally a Tuku is born, belongs to a global monastery. Usually the monastery comes and escorts the boy with his family, and at the same time the belongings and the house and the field, everything goes to the monastery. In this way, but when the second Panchen Tuku was born in this family, the 5th Dalai Lama intervened, said, all right, you Tuku could be recognized and could be led to the monastery, but not his brother, the other families. They should be left to continue their own family, which was a very thoughtful thing. But then there was another Panchen Lama was born about a century later in the same family, and this time when the Tuku was escorted from the family to the monastery, the whole family, everything, house, field, everything was confiscated rather, and was taken as a possession of the monastery. But all the other big families still, like they were called Shuzang and Pazang and Minzang and so on. The families we still members of these families are still in existence in Tibet. And I should mention there are two still big, quite important monasteries. They are called the Meri and the Yongtongling. The Meri was founded in the 14th century, and the other one, the Yongtongling, was founded in the 19th century. But these were completely destroyed during the Cultural Revolution. You will only find the ruins there, nothing more left there. But fortunately, by the Tibetan refugees, Bompo refugees, when I say the Bompo, which means that the people who follow the Bon religion called the Bompo. And the Bompo people, when they came to India, the refugees re-established the Meri Monastery in Himachal Pradesh in India, which is now quite a large monastery, more than 200 monks, and so on. I should go back again and to say something about this earlier belief of the Bon religion. I think it is something an anthropology would call it some sort of indigenous, unorganized, or maybe not quite totally like shamanistic, but it's very strongly colored by the idea of animistic or animism, because it cares a lot about the natural environment. And it's extremely important that the idea of this not totally coming through the Buddhist text, but there are native ideas. For example, that the spirits that live in trees and the rocks and the mountains and lakes and so on. And these, rather like the gods Kami in Shintoism, that you find everywhere in the mountains, so in the rocks and so on. And now the Tibetan type of spirit, there are mainly four of these, some sort of four categories. The first one is Nyen, which is a spirit, some kind of spirits that live on the mountains or above the mountains. They are called Nyen. For example, Nyechin Tangla, which is quite a large, a very high mountain. And then the second is the Lu. The Tibetan term is the Lu, which is the water spirit, a spirit that lives in water. The Lu was there before Buddhism came, and later it is used to translate the Sanskrit Naga. But it is difficult to know before the Naga culture came to Tibet, whether the Tibetans had the form of Lu, like the Indian ones. It's difficult to know. We don't know what exactly the Lu looked like before the 2nd century. This Lu, which lives always down below surface of the earth, or in the water, in springs, in the lakes, in the rivers. It is opposite to the Nyen spirits, the spirits that live up on the mountain. So that there is a sort of a distinction between the two. The lay people always worship or care about this Nyen spirits, whereas it is the ladies who worship the Lu downstairs, down in lower places and so on. Now the Lu, there is a very long text called the Lumbu, in 3 volumes, Lumbu, which is extremely important text. And this, even among the Buddhist monasteries, you always find a copy of these Lumbung texts, because it was considered as extremely important to have these in the temples and so on. And so there are a lot of different editions of these Bon texts, Dergi and Takhti, Rasan, and also the most important ones are the Punaka in Bhutan. there was an extremely beautiful edition of Lumbung. And the Lumbung printed editions you find almost in all of the Buddhist or Bamboo temples. The idea is that the Lu is something to do with the rich. The Lu brings wealth to the family or to the temple, and also it protects the surrounding of the established place. And the third category of this spirit is called Sadak. Sadak, some kind of a lord of the earth. This is not so well known. And the fourth is the third. It is a spirit that lives in the rocks. Neither Sadak nor Tur are not so common or not so popular then as Lu and Nye. Now, in the connection with the Nye, I would like to show you today some photographs of the mountains where the Nyen is supposed to live or supposed to dwell in the Tibetan belief systems. So that leads us to the natural environment. How important is the natural environment in this religious belief? But before showing the photographs of the mountains, I would like to point out two different things, two different mountain cults in the Tibetan society, in the Tibetan culture. The first, there are certain type of mountains which are more, shall we say, these mountains are always sacred, but certain types of mountains like the mountain Kailash or Zari, that are considered more important than the other mountains. For example, Mountain Zari, which is extremely important site for the both religious people, for the Buddhists, for the Hindu yogins, and so on. And these quite typically different thing. I mean, when the Bamboo go on a pilgrimage to Mountain Kailash, they go around the mountains and they go in their own way, like that. Whereas the Buddhists and the Hindus as well, they all go around like that. So these are the mountains sort of common to both, to these really grand religious divisions. That is the Hindu, mostly Shivaists, and then the Bamboo, and they of course the Buddhists. According to the Buddhist tradition from the 11th century, Mountain Kailash is some sort of the site or sacred site of the Shambhara. This is somehow later Buddhist tradition from the 11th century onwards. Buddhists began to identify different mountains according to the for example, this is the mountain of Denjo, Shambhara. There is another ideology lie behind this description, is that once a Lama identify a mountain and he takes a possession of this, in fact, saying that it's the Buddhist place, and then he treads a path around the monastery so that pilgrims can go around of the mountain, and that is the place that becomes or belongs to the one sect of the religion. And the other mountain type that's in Tibetan culture is the Yula, the local deity, and this is also called Shida, the base, the lord of the base. Now I will start to show the photos. Here it is just a rough Tibetan map, and I will show you where the mountains I shall be talking about, where they locate. Here is the photo, Kangti Se Changshu in Tibetan. Here, the north side, north face of the mountain Kailash. By the way, the mountain Kailash, Tibetans never say Kailash, which is the Indian word. Tibetan called it Tisse, which is the native term. Why they call it the Kailash? Because when Chandra Das went to Tibet as a spy, who then made a map in the different places in the Tibet. He started putting the names, Hindu names for Tibetan sites, like Mountain Kailash, or the river Champu, which is a large river flowing in central Tibet, called the Brahmaputra, which is Tibetans never call it Brahmaputra, and it is in the Tibetans Champu. So later, when the maps were produced, everybody called it Brahmaputra or Kailash. In the same way, like there is two lakes of the Mountain Kailash. This is the Mapon Yinsu. And the other one is Langansur. Rakashasa, I mean, there's only you find the Indian names in this. It is very confusing why we should have Indian names for Tibetan places. Nobody knows. This is the south side, I mean, of south side of the mountain Kailash. The next one. Here is the mountain. That is the mountain Tsari, which is, according to Buddhists, this is a mountain of Shambhara. Why is it Shambhara? Because it's difficult to explain, in fact. There is no really clear, so far as I found, the explanation for this. But it is true that the great, for example, Champachari, great Kajupalama, stayed there very long in this area, and then his main divinity was Shambhara, and therefore he went on identifying different places in the vicinity of this mountain as a place of the Manchu or Shambhara cycle. This is another valley near Tsari. I don't mean that I have been there and took a photograph. I just borrowed it from somebody else. This mountain Tsari. Here is the Nyangchu, which is a very large river that flows downwards and then combine or flows into the Tsangpo River, which we mentioned, and this is some sort of extremely important river, as a second river for the Bon tradition. And then this is the mountain Bonri, it's called the mountain of Bon, and it is located in the Gongpo. And this is the mountain where pilgrims go, and they circumambulate only Bambu way. And this, according to I think it is according to the Bon tradition, this was opened as some kind of sacred place in the 12th century by Tugdira Vandisi, by a Bon yogin who lived in the vicinity of this mountain. This is just a simple map to show that here Pauri is located, and this is the river we just saw. The river we just saw, Nyangchu, flowing down, and this Brahmaputra Watsangpo coming this way. They flow together at the confluence of these two rivers. Then you find this mountain. Well, here, as you all know very well what happened, it is Potang Potala, the palace Potala, but before the Potala was built, it was a hill. And this was already the sacred mountain of Avalokiteshvara, according to Buddhists, which is not quite clear before this hill became Potala. Or rather, it is not knowing exactly what it was. Here we find Chakpuri, again another small hill. This one here, Chakpuri in Lhasa. There used to be the medical college, a college for studying medicine, and this was destroyed during the college. In the partially destroyed in 1959, and after 1966 onwards, this was destroyed. It was completely, it was an extremely important medical center. And this hill here is a Yumbulanka. Here, this is the hill where there is some kind of a castle, supposed to be. This, of course, is rebuilt after the destruction of during the Cultural Revolution, the older building. But the name is very significant in connection with the myth of the first Tibetan king. It says the Lankar, Lar, here, something to do with the soul, the castle of soul. And the Yungur, I expected the name of the place itself there. Here is the mountain Shatungri. This is a mountain situated in Sharko, the place where I was born, which is about the Zongchu, the place called Zongchu, and also Sharko. It is about 300 kilometers to the north from Tendu and Stuen. Sharko, Shatungri, Shar here, the east. Tongri, conch shell, mountain conch shell, because it doesn't look like a stone. Here is another one. This is the view. I remember that we used to be able to see it from my own village, this mountain. And near this mountain, there is this beautiful. There are a lot of beautiful small lakes called Senso, golden Senso. So this is now quite extremely important, the beauty spot for the pilgrims coming from China, Taiwan, and so on. Now we come to the mountain Anyimachi. Anyimachi, which is in the Amdo, near Kukuno Lake, Anyimachi. So in Amdo, a lot of the mountains have got the titles like Anyi, Grandapa, because the local people, the traditions, that they were descendants of the mountain gods. And so they called Anyi, the Grandpa, Anyimachi. This is just, when I say the local deity or the mountain cult, there is always the idea, the concept of the mountain deity as it looks like a man riding on either horse or another animal. You find in every district, for every village there is one. And this is sort of a cult, extremely important for the social organization, because one member from another village cannot come to the village and join with the group of the worship. If you do, then you are committed to become a member of that particular society. Here is another mountain, which is called Mountain Madhu. Right down there, it is in the Jaron, south of Chindu. another mountain, sacred mountain for the Pombos, and the pilgrims go around this mountain, and it is extremely important one in this area. Now we're going to go back in the hill. This is the Samye Hipuri, the small hill just near to the south of the Samye Monastery. And this was the place where Padmasambhava is supposed to have subdued all the Tibetan demons and the gods and the demons and made them to take a vow to protect Buddhism. This one is the Kulankari, which is extremely important one, and is situated between Tibet and Bhutan, just on the border. Kulankari. It was the Nyingma Lama Dorje Lengpa, and who is also called the Yongtung Lengpa, so sort of half of Nyingma, and made some kind of written a lot of ritual texts to worship this mountain. And it is extremely important in eastern Bhutan. Every year they have an annual festival of this particular mountain. This is the Menyak Kunkar, any Menyak, which is okay, another some sort of Buddhist mountain. People go around it, Menyak Kunkar, and the other one here. We have Kawakarpu, Ronsin Kawakarpu, which is extremely important, again, Buddhist sacred place, and Pompo as well. It is in the south, in the camp. This is the Sharalatsi in the Menyak, a very beautiful mountain. And this is the Yula type. Nobody goes around this mountain, and this is not the object of pilgrimage. This is the Maoju. We didn't know exactly what is the function of this mountain first, before it became completely Buddhist, because this site here, the hermitage, is called Maoju. It was the place of Mangpa Lotawa in the Lodok. Chongpo Ristitu, which is the Chongpo in the camp. And this is the hermitage of the Bon religion, and extremely important one, where a lot of the historical figures of Bon practitioners lived there. And this one, Gonchin Zongang, you find it just on the south side of the Himalaya, seeing it from Darjeeling in Okalepong, Gonchin Zongang, and sometimes called the Serin Chengang, the five goddesses of this mountain, which are mentioned in the life, the biography of the Mulari person. So here I don't have a photograph of Yalashampu, the mountain Yalashampu, which is located in southern Tibet. And here it is a painting. It shows the Padmasambhava is challenged by the gods, by the god Yalashampu, in the form of a white wild yak. In southern Tibet, in Setang and Samye and other places in the Lodok, in southern Tibet, the white wild yak is always a symbol of this mountain Yalashampu. Yandu Yinsok, and this is the lake of Yandu. The lake, which is, there is always some sort of, in the local tradition, that the mountain is a male and the lake is some kind of female. And the two is always some kind of a couple in the imagination of the local people. And so you have the similar ideas in the Tibetan Kesa epic as well. And the male always is on the side of the Yula, and the female, the woman, on the side of the lake. I would like to come now to the question of the natural environment. In the recent years in the Tibet, there has always been a problem of the violation of the natural environment, like the deforestation, degraded environment, and there's also problem of mining in the different places without any making distinction whether it is something to do with the sacred or not. And there has always been a very violent and fight against or protest, depending on the big companies that carry out the violation of the mountain sceneries and other places. And the local Tibetans, when they protest, they always say that the sacred mountain and this sacred place. They never say that the resources that you exploit also belong to us. They never said this, or rather, very, very rarely. They always say, this is the sacred mountain. This is the sacred. You should not do this. And I think the idea is a sacred thing. Is this coming from these more religious ideas, or because of this Nyen, or spirit, or low spirit which live in these mountain areas, in the local places. In other words, what I'm trying to say is this, with the idea or the belief in the spirit that live, that dwell in the different places, also encourage people to protect the environment, natural environment. Huh? Kamangan. Well, I think I would like rather stop there, and we're going to discuss any questions that you might have. Thank you.
My question is, when you look at pilgrimage practices related to mountains, how much of a local practice is that? How much are people affiliated with, for example, the mountain that they would see from their home, like the picture you showed? And to what extent do people also travel to other mountains that would be outside of that, the purview of their home? And if there was a lot of travel in a sort of like a larger scope of different types of pilgrimages, how do people know about all the different mountains and so forth?
Well, before the Chinese take over, shall we say, the old society, there is always the division, the Tibetan word, the Tsowa, which is some kind of literally means a tribe. But if you see, so you find that Tsowa Shi, Tsowa Nga, Tsotu, Tsodin, 6, 7, and so on. So it is some kind of a social organization. One can have many villages within it, but they have usually there is one mountain there, and then there is a monastery as well. So these two poles, the monastic establishment and the mountain, beside of this group organization. Now, if you are a member of this Tsowa, you are supposed to worship this particular mountain, which is found in the area. And that means somebody who belongs to, coming from another Tsowa, you are not allowed to join in. If you do, or if you want to join in, that means you are more or less thought that you are going to migrate or join them in that group. And once you do that, then all the regulations of this particular group you are supposed to undertake, and you join in to protect this group. So there is some kind of obligation once you join in of that group. So that's why I say that, I think, am I answering your question? Yes. So this culture, this is a culture which is extremely important. They have to have some kind of social obligation once you join in, and once if the community had a problem with another neighbor or fighting, you are supposed to join in there to fight in order to protect your own community, because you are a member of the community that worship at the same mountain. That's one aspect of social organization. And the other one is that you have this one particular monastery of this particular group, and all the monks, the local monks, go to the particular monastery. So therefore, you have a monastic establishment which only the monks attend, whereas the monks do not worship with the laymen when they go up. Every year, every annual festival, all the laymen carry quite a, 6 or 7 foot long pole made in shape of arrow, and then they carry, and then put it in the cane just before the mountain. And that is only laymen and not monks go there. So you have two opposite organizations within one group. One is the monastic tradition, the other is the laymen connected with the mountain cult.
You mentioned that the Bunpo and the traditional Buddhists circumambulate the
Yes.
same mountain in different directions, right?
Yes.
Like oftentimes the same mountain at the same time.
No, there are only two mountains that has, for example, Mountain Kailash. This, as I say, it's sort of a common mountain for all the religions. I mean, particularly Buddhists and the Bonpos in the Tibet. And the Buddhists go around like that, and then the Bonpos go around the other way. So when they meet together, they laugh at each other and so on. And I happened to be in the Jaron at one time in a temple. I went to see just, then I saw one a man and a woman. They went up together to the door, and then they split. One went that way, and the other one. I was wondering what happened. Then when I went up to ask the question, what's happening? So the wife was a Bonpo, and the other, her husband, was a Buddhist. So they had to go around that. But it was quite open, a very friendly way. But it can be quite hostile as well, sometimes. And the other mountain, which is Lagi Kongpo Piri, which is situated in the Kongpo. Kongpo is about 400 kilometers from to the east of Lhasa. And this mountain can only be circumambulated by the Bonpos. If the Buddhists did the other way around, it would be went by force.
I'm very interested about your discussion about the Lu.
Yes.
Lu, and you just said the Lu is coming from Naga. Are they the same or they are different? Lu and Naga. The water goddess.
Yes.
The Lu and Naga, are they the same?
Nanga.
Naga.
Yes. Well, before Buddhism came, I think Lu was there already, the word. And I think it is always the same, a spirit that's connected with the water. But then when the Buddhist text were translated into Tibetan, the Tibetans use the Lu to translate the word Naga. As I mentioned, that we don't know in the 7th century what kind of form of this Lu Tibetans had, because we never see any paintings or rock inscriptions or anything. But then the Naga form, as we know, is some type of upper body is a human, and the rest is some kind of snake part of this spirit. But this is the Indian form of Naga. And when I say Naga Lu, in the Tibetan belief, we don't know exactly what form it had.
Thank you for your talk.
Yeah.
As you just mentioned that there were a master who was half Bonpo, half Buddhist. I'm wondering, I certainly have a thought that if he went to the pilgrimage to the Kang district, which direction he would take?
Yes.
Counterclockwise or clockwise? Because he was a half Bonpo, half Buddhist, half Mother.
I suppose the people are both, sometimes both Bumbu and Buddhist, I mean, it can be. But quite often it's just by amusing that I mean, this is the only example I've ever seen. I imagine the wife just want to make a joke, I mean, just to make, just to see that she had a different faith. That much I know.
You must have a headache in the front of Kailash, which direction to take if he wants to go to pilgrimage. Just wondering.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you, Professor, for your lecture. I have two questions. One is about the documents. We know there are some religion documents already found in Dunhuang manuscripts. And are there any more Bön documents about the Tibetan Empire period or of this period? That's the first question. And the second is, are there any material heritage about the Bön belong to or of the Tibetan Empire period?
Can you say it again? I didn't follow you.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Yeah, my first is about the document. We have already known there are some Bön documents already found in Dunhuang manuscripts. And are there any more Bön documents about the Tibetan Empire period or belongs to or of the the Empire period?
Yes, okay. What is the word did you say you found in Dunhuang manuscripts?
Yes, there are already some. And are there any more except the Dunhuang manuscripts? Is about it's about
Bön.
Yeah, about
Yes.
Bön.
Or you mean the word Bön?
Yeah, B-O-N.
Oh, I see. Okay. I mean, yes. Bön word, of course. Yeah, there are, I don't know how many manuscripts there are in the Dome, but there are hundreds of them. Ritual texts. They are usually ritual texts, and the people who perform the rituals are called the Bön or Dompo, and also the word Shin as well used. But this is rather curious because Shin is usually a kind of a clan name, whereas the Bön is never been used as a clan name. But then in Dunhuang manuscript, you always come to see Bön and Shin, sometimes opposed to each other. So nobody can explain exactly what's the function, the difference in the function of the Bön priest and the Shin priest. And these were two, both designating as a kind of priests, carrying out the rituals, and particularly the ritual, the funeral rituals for the king or for the emperor of Tibet. And this can be usually very, very elaborate funeral rituals. They have to build, for example, very large, enormous tombs, which still exist in the Tibet, in southern Tibet, very large. There are about 6 or 7 of them. These are sort of imperial tombs. And of course, we found, I mean, nobody ever carried out any kind of excavation of these tombs. It would be very interesting one day, if ever does. Nobody.
Just to carry on with that point, I'm curious if there's a great diversity with respect to funerary practices in the Bunpo tradition, funeral practices, or if you see, in general, continuity in the sources you have, and comparing that with what you see today with Bunpo practitioners. So I'm just curious if you could say more about funeral practices in the Bunpo tradition and whether there's great diversity within Tibet amongst Bunpos, or if there's a lot of continuity over time and across the different Bunpo communities.
Bunpo practitioners.
Yeah, funeral practices, the funeral practices.
Funeral practices,
Yeah. Say
Yes.
more, please, about the Bunpo practices.
Yes. The Bunpos are particularly some kind of regarded as a great specialist in funeral rituals. From quite a long time, I mean, from the ancient time, they always had got very elaborate rituals for the carrying out funeral rites. And we are not quite sure that during the imperial period, there are probably involved animal sacrifices as well. When the Tibetan emperor or king dies, even the members of the court, in the court, supposed to die together, and all are buried in the same compound, and their animals as well. And this is not exactly very clear in the Dunhuo manuscript, which is translated into French by Mademoiselle Lalue in France. And this text shows that it's elaborate. It's described stage by stage how these funerals are carried out, and the members of the royal family and their domestic animals also somehow put together everything. So it has nothing to do with particularly the Bonpo practice blood sacrifice. It's not that. It is something to do with the family, first the king, and then there are the ministers, and then there are horses, and then they're all together. This I'm talking about according to this particular text. We haven't found any other evidence, for example, archaeological or otherwise.
I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, we'll stop.
Okay, thank you.